why don't we begin by your telling us a bit about Highline Schools and the community you serve?
Highline Public Schools is a richly diverse school system and community located just south of Seattle. And we serve the cities of SeaTac, Normandy Park, Burien, and Des Moines, Washington, and some unincorporated parts of King County. We have approximately 20,000 students, pre-K through 12. Each one of them brilliant, beautiful, and brimming with promise is how we describe them. And our students come to us from a beautiful variety of backgrounds. Upwards of 100 languages are spoken in our district, and our community prides itself on that diversity. And as a result, one of the goals that has been a part of our strategic plan now for the past 5 years is that we work to graduate over time every student bilingual, biliterate, because we think that's such an important thing for our students to have. And we also believe that placing a value on speaking a language other than whatever language you were brought up with really honors the fact that many of our students come to us speaking a language other than English as their first language. We are in the second phase of our strategic plan. Our strategic plan is sort of premised on a promise, and our promise in Highline Public Schools is that every student is known by name, strength, and need, so that each graduates prepared to choose their future. And that name, strength, and need is very important. We believe that all of our students are capable of greatness, but we also acknowledge that many of our students come to us with some pretty serious challenges in their lives at times. And we believe that too often in school systems, we focus on what our students need or are struggling with, and that overshadows what they are really good at. And we believe it's important to, yes, know where our students are struggling and help them, but we also want to emphasize what they're good at so that we are really building their confidence, their resilience, so that they become, strong, independent learners, critical thinkers, and problem solvers, because ultimately that's what our world needs for us to prepare our high school graduates today. Bernie, is there anything you'd like to add about our wonderful Highline community?
No, I think you did a great job there, Susan, and the fact that, we're just emphasizing, as we all do in public education, potential. And, I mean, the embracing the diversity our district enjoys, I think, is another real key tenet of what we're doing.
Well, great. Good beginning. Now let's turn to our topic today, your successful bond issue, passed, if I recall correctly, on November 8th. That was 2016, right?
Yes, correct.
Right. Bernie, why don't you tell us what led you and your colleagues on the board and Susan and the executive team to put the bond measure on the November 8th ballot? Give us some background on that. In terms of needs.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I think that's really an important piece too, Doug, is the historical nature of why that bond existed on that ballot. And prior to 2002, to go back a ways, our district hadn't passed any bonds for like 16 years. And obviously during those 16 years, our capacity is in flux. Our maintenance, although we do the best we can, our facilities are eroding, and there's very little we can do about it without these bonds, obviously. So in 2002, the community supported a bond to rebuild some of our elementary schools. I don't know the exact number on the top of my head. In 2006, they supported another bond. And then 2010 would have been our normal cycle. And as we all, I'm sure, recall, some of us painfully so, 2009 was the beginning of the recession. 2010 did not seem like the best timing to ask the citizens and constituents of our community to support a bond. And so the board decided at that time to postpone. Even though obviously our needs were great, we felt that it was a good sensitive thing to do for the community and frankly would give us a better shot, so to speak, at passing. So in 2010, we decided not to run, and then 2011, we crossed that same bridge and decided to go back, and ultimately ended up in 2014 was when we decided that we just could not wait any longer to run a bond, despite the fact that the economy was still in recovery. And so we ran it. And the package that we put forth was well thought out. It was well conceived. I think it was communicated well to the public. There were like we always experience. There were certainly some cons and some pros. And in 2014, that bond failed. And obviously, our needs were continuing. Our schools were continuing to erode. Our capacity was in flux still, and on the increase at that point. And then that brought us to November 8th of 2016, which was obviously a successful bond campaign. Susan,
so how
anything
close was the 2014 election?
And Susan knows this number, but I think
I have that. So
yeah.
We ran in November of 2014, and in Washington State, we need a supermajority to pass school bonds, meaning we need a 60% vote. And we received 59.28% of the vote.
Oh.
We lost by 212. We put the bond measure on the ballot in February of 2015, and it failed by an even larger margin. So, and I know Bernie's going to talk about how we rebounded, but the one thing that I'll point out is that we, that was a back-to-back loss, and we were pretty wounded and frustrated and exhausted, but we knew we had to get to the bottom of that failure. And, there had been organized opposition on various fronts, as there, often is. But we actually did some community surveying and learned that the problem actually was not so much the actual components of the bond package itself, but rather that there just wasn't a high enough level of trust by people in the community in the district. And so that's what led us to developing our Capital Facilities Advisory Committee.
Okay, well, before we get into that, Bernie, why don't you give us an overview of the campaign strategy that led to the victory in November 2016?
Okay.
What were the key elements? What accounts for the fact that you really won overwhelmingly?
Well, I think a lot of it was what we will talk about here shortly, which is the Capital Facilities Advisory Committee. But I think really the primary thing was that we all took a step back and said, what is it that's really preventing the community from supporting us in this endeavor? And as a board member, we're obviously charged with being the voice of the community to the schools and the voice of the schools to the community. And what we were hearing in our interactions with the community was that, as Susan mentioned, there was a trust issue, and there was a lot of folks that were advocating for the fact that the district was operating in a silo and making decisions behind closed doors, and the thing that the reference I guess that we use a lot is that it was being done to the community and not done with the community, and really stepping back and recognizing that when we were suffering some pretty severe budget cuts in between 2007 and 2011, we developed a process where we had a list of items that we felt were necessary to cut to meet our fiscal responsibilities. We listed those items out, held community meetings. The community showed up, helped us prune down that list, and when it came time to approve the budgets of those years, we had very little, if any, community and public comment around those decisions because they were done with the community. And from the board's perspective, we call those defendable decisions. Defendable in the sense that we've reached out, we've heard the voice of the community, we've really, in every way possible, tried to honor that and enable those decisions to really come to fruition so the community could say, we spoke. We didn't always agree, but they listened, and here's the outcome of it. So we had kind of developed this process. And so when it came time to really step back and go, all right, we cannot afford to lose on another bond campaign. How are we going to do that? That's where we really started looking at, okay, how do we do this with the community and not to the community so that, again, we can defend this decision in our conversations throughout the community. We can counter the naysayers by saying that, you know, this was an ask that was developed by a representative group of folks within the community, and I think that just really kind of helped us message to our constituents that, you know, these are the needs and the desires and the requests of your neighbors and community members, and they're doing that on behalf of all of our students. And the messaging and the framing of that message, I felt, it just really resonated with people. So, Susan?
Good. Do you want to talk a little bit about the citizens group, or would you like me to, Bernie?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. I think that's a really key component. And
yeah,
go ahead.
So, you know, we'll talk in a little bit about the Capital Facilities Advisory Committee itself, but I think Bernie would agree that another component that contributed to our successful bond passage in 2016 was that we had a very active citizens group. As my fellow superintendents and board members out there know, districts can't run their own campaigns. They're legally prohibited from doing so. So we rely on citizens in the community to give their time to help raise the money and advocate for passage of the bonds, since as a district employee on district time we can inform but we cannot persuade. And so we had a terrific pillar in the community. He actually, he and his wife actually had been leaders in the district years ago, and now are real fixtures in the community. And he, Chuck Tuman, I went to him and said, I really need your help. We really need to reactivate the citizens group, because as you would imagine, since it had been a good 10 years since the district had passed a bond, that citizens group had really just petered out, and it needed to be brought back to life. And Chuck just worked tirelessly with other wonderful, dedicated members of our Highline community to get the word out, to help people understand why this was so important, and hosted meetings and did the sign waving and the phone banking and all of that, which is you know, really necessary for people to know what's coming out. And without our citizens group, you know, and even with CFAC, I think without that citizens group, we probably wouldn't have gotten the 67% vote to pass our bond that we did. And so having those citizens that you can go to who are willing to step up, I am, you know, forever in Chuck's debt for doing that, and grateful to all of our community members who rallied around the need to provide our students and staff with the facilities that they absolutely deserve.
Well, Susan, why don't you home in on this group? I believe you call it the Capital Facilities Advisory Committee.
Yes.
Which played a key part in this really stunning victory in November 16. Tell us about that committee. Who was on it? What was its mission? And how did it work?
So our Capital Facilities Advisory Committee, we call it affectionately CFAC, was put together in 2015. As Bernie and I have said, we knew we had a trust issue. And we knew that if we just, and I do think it's important to point out, you know, Bernie mentioned earlier that, you know, the community felt that we had done this to them rather than with them, even though when we went out for those bonds that lost, we had many community meetings. It's not as if we just came up with it and then slapped it on the ballot. I mean, the citizens group and district staff did a lot to get the word out. But I think as you know, fellow district leaders know, there's no such thing as over-communicating or communicating enough on issues as important as these. And so we knew that we had to build trust. So to Bernie's point, building on the process that the board and the district had used in prior years around budget cuts, we went out and engaged the community. And to sort of qualify for CFAC, we held a lottery. Because one of the things we also knew was that if we just appointed community members to CFAC, we would be accused of stacking the deck, if you will. So we wanted to make sure that all individuals in the community, those who supported, and equally important, maybe even more important, those who didn't support the previous bond in the district, had representation on that committee. And so people submitted their names, and we held a lottery to choose about 40 community individuals and staff, and we also had student representatives as well. And so we held this lottery, and, beautifully, we got a real range of representation on CFAC. There were people on there who were staunch no votes in the prior bond. And we also had some folks who saw the need and were willing to say, here's why this is important. I think it's really fascinating to point out that one of the co-chairs of CFAC was a woman who's lived in the community for many years and had served on city council and had actually voted against the bond before. And she joined CFAC and became the co-chair and is still on CFAC today because we've continued it. And she's become one of the greatest supporters. And I think what did it was that this is definitely a citizens group that is supported by staff. So this is not a group of district staff that's looking at data and making decisions. This is a group of community members that receive support from staff around what data they want to see. But these individuals just dedicated, hours, weeks, months to going over all of the data that we had actually reviewed when we came up with the original bond package. And they were and they had some hard discussions. As I said, this group was representative of all the varying opinions, pro and con, in the bond. And what was wonderful was that they met monthly, and they determined the agenda, but they let staff know what data and information they would need. And they did a terrific job of moderating themselves. If a particular CFAC member would get stuck on a particular issue or personal agenda, the group itself really moderated themselves well. And in the end, what CFAC came up with, the bond recommendation that they brought to the board that eventually went on the ballot in 2016, was not wildly different from the package that the board had approved in 2014. They had trimmed it off. They thought the number was too big, so they brought the overall number down. But the major elements were the same. But we think the difference, though, was that these community members had seen the information for themselves and drawn their own conclusions, rather than us saying, here are the conclusions we've come to based on this information. They really wanted to dig in and get into the weeds, and we gave them that opportunity and supported them in doing that. And then I think, as important, the CFAC members really became community ambassadors. So they could talk to neighbors, people at the grocery store, at restaurants. When someone would say, oh, well, this is wrong, they would say, well, actually, let me share with you the data that we've looked at. So it was really just a really powerful example of community members coming together and taking leadership and ownership in helping the district move forward. And CFAC is still going. And they're doing the incredibly hard work right now of not just determining what will be in phase 2 and 3 of our bond, which, we're going to have to continue to run bonds because we continue to have facilities needs.
Right.
But they are right now working on proposed boundary changes that are needed because of the additional schools that we are building from the last bond. And those are really hard discussions, and they are just up front, leading that conversation, and facing really tough questions. I admire them and appreciate them greatly. And Bernie, I'm not sure what else you'd like to add, but please jump in.
Let me jump in with just one comment. So apparently you've institutionalized CFAC. It's an ongoing committee?
Yes,
Part
yes,
of your...
it has turned out to be that way. I don't know, and I'd love for Bernie to jump in. I don't know that when we initiated it, we envisioned it as an ongoing body, but it has proven itself to be, and we're finding it to be incredibly valuable. And we have some members who have been on it since 2015 and are still on it, and we've gotten new members as well. So there's a tremendous level of commitment on the part of the people who are on CFAC.
Well, Bernie, when you continue the discussion of CFAC, also say something about the ongoing relationship to the board. You're obviously a board member, and I'm sure there is frequent communication with the board. Tell me a bit about that.
Okay. With CFAC, Doug, just to clarify?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, first, just a couple things maybe to add to the CFAC thing that I think are really critical points. And Susan did a great job of representing what I had mentioned before around developing these defendable decisions, if you will. And but also, this group came up with a couple of really brilliant things because as we all kind of smiled when their recommendations came forward, primarily because their recommendations were so close and similar to what we had put before the community in 2014 and February of 15. But they did something else that was, we thought, really brilliant, which was they dedicated a small amount of money towards designing schools for the next phase. So they took the package that we developed in 2014 and February 15 and broke it down into smaller numbers, as Susan had mentioned. But they also presented it to the community as this is what we're asking for phase 1. And then down the horizon here, we've got phase 2 and phase 3. And so they described all of those to the community. They asked for support of phase 1, but they've already begun to develop this mentality of these next ones are coming. Here's some dollars that will design the school that's in your neighborhood, because we all see this throughout public education where and unfortunately, it's the what's in it for me when the voters come time to cast for bonds. And by giving them those little carrots, if you will, or promises rather, then I think that not only were we successful in 2016, but hopefully we've kind of set the stage for these next phases. And one of the things that we've talked about in general is to get our bond cycle on a presidential cycle so that we know turnout is a big thing, and we know that turnout is best during those years. So anyway, but our communication with the committee itself is that as board members, we tried to attend the meetings whenever we could because they were very time-consuming, and at times I think they were a little contentious. But as these 10 months of meeting came on, these 10 months of meetings went on, I think that group became so immersed in the work that, as Susan mentioned, and my wife often jokes, is I can't go to the grocery store without a conversation. Well, I think that these people were known to be on CFAC, and they were our champions in the community for the decision also. Mm-hmm. But all these little things are what fascinate me. I don't know that, and Susan, I'd be interested to hear what you think, but I don't think it was one big thing or even two big things. I think it was a handful of little things that developed the will within our community to support what we were asking.
I think that's right, Bernie. And the one thing that I believe has helped build a strong level of trust within CFAC and between CFAC and staff and the broader community is that the CFAC is very clear, and the co-chairs of CFAC are very clear that they are running this process. They are the ones that are going to come up with the recommendations. But they can't do that without the help of staff, because staff provides them with the data and the information. I believe that the time that staff has spent, because members of my cabinet meet with CFAC to put to help them put their agendas together and make sure they are given the information that they need, and then CFAC runs the meetings. But my leadership team has dedicated tremendous time into working with CFAC members, providing them with good information, and I think that's gone a long way in in community members seeing district leaders as really good, honest, hardworking people because they've gotten to know them, and they've gotten to see that none of us has any agenda other than serving the children and families of Highline well. That's the one common thing that we all share. And I think that has become sort of the prevailing sentiment, and I think the amount of respect that has developed, not just between CFAC and staff in the district, but between staff in the district and CFAC, is going to continue to serve the community well in the months and years ahead.
Now, small question, but I assume the composition of CFAC has evolved over time. How do you keep its composition updated? How do you add new people? You said you did a lottery originally, but how's it updated since then?
So the original members who served in 2015-16 were invited to serve for another one-year term. And if a member, we did have some members, so while I said it was lottery, we did have some members that were appointed to CFAC by a community organization or city, because we wanted, as I mentioned earlier, we don't represent just one city entity as many districts do. We have multiple. Okay. So we wanted to make sure that we had representation across all of our cities. So if a member who had been appointed to the original CFAC wished to step down, that organization was invited to appoint a new representative. If a member who had been chosen by lottery decided to step down, then that position would be refilled by lottery. So we held another lottery last June, and 9 new members were selected for a total of 33 CFAC members for the 17-18 school year. And we believe we'll continue this process because it has served well in terms of some people staying on, so we have that institutional history and memory, but also getting new people on there, so we get fresh ideas as well.
Sounds like it's been a very effective mechanism for community involvement. Really fascinating. You two have presented a really effective case study, and I appreciate your time. Before we go on to our various different agendas today, would either of you would like to add anything? By way of final words?
If I could, just real quick, and then I'll turn it over to Susan. You had mentioned something, Doug, about institutionalizing CFAC. And I think that more than maybe just institutionalizing the way we oversee our capital facilities requests to the community, that process for engaging the community, as in, bringing in a representative group, just as we did for the budget cuts of a decade ago, but engaging the community in ways where they really can represent the voice of their neighborhood and their community. I really believe that that's the culture that we want within our district, and that culture is representative from the very top of the food chain, so to speak, all the way into the classroom. And so when we really engage the community, we do so in a respectful way, and we're listening for all of the voices, and we're really trying to make sure that everybody has that representation. Now, the risk is that people may still be angry because we didn't see it their way, or we didn't get their point. But I'm a firm believer that if they have an opportunity to voice their concerns, that they will still be angry, but at least they'll feel heard. And that, I think, is an important piece of institutionalizing processes such as Capital Facilities Advisory Committee.
Well, have you taken a formal voting approach, or have you let consensus emerge on key issues?
Within the committees, or?
Yes, within CFAC.
Well, as Susan mentioned, the staff supports CFAC and their decisions, but ultimately their goal is to get to a recommendation to put before the board. Okay. Now, from the board's perspective, we really want to be authentic in that engagement, and so in the case of our topic today, November 2016's bond, we accepted that recommendation exactly as it was presented. And I think that kind of begins to develop that trust piece. But ultimately, the board makes the decisions, but the board's very conscious of being authentic and also being respectful of the recommendation that comes forward. So unless it's something just goes against our strategic plan or the culture of our district, then we're inclined to accept those recommendations, even though we personally may not agree. We have to respect the fact that they were developed as a group by the community for the community.
Great. Susan?
Yes, I would just say, as I said, the CFAC members themselves did a fabulous job of having the hard conversations, but ultimately coming to a recommendation that they could, in good faith make to the board. And, were any of our CFAC members on the phone right now, they would tell you both during the bond conversation and now during the boundary conversation, when they recognize that they have to put forward a recommendation to the board. And each member of CFAC may not love every part of that recommendation. When you're making decisions at this scale, we're 20,000 students across 33 buildings, it's very unlikely, I would argue impossible, that you'll make decisions that make everyone happy. But what the CFAC members have accepted is they have to look at the good of the whole community and the district, not just what impacts them or their neighbors specifically. And I think that is that's admirable, because that is hard to do. But they would tell you that while they may not support every part of that recommendation of the board, they stand behind it as what they believe is in the best interest of our schools and our community.
I think we have another podcast topic. And it's redrawing boundaries is one of the big strategic issues around the country. You two have done a great job. You've told a fascinating story in enough detail that it can be very useful for K-12 leaders around the country. I want to thank you and wish you a great day. Really appreciate your time.